The thunder cracked overhead like a whip as Delilah Valentine clutched her shawl against the cutting wind, her steps quickening along Sonora's muddy Main Street. The Montana Territory of 1876 had seen a harsh spring, but nothing compared to the storm brewing in her own life. She glanced at her bruised wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve, and shuddered not from the cold but from knowing Jacob was likely already looking for her. Sonora was little more than a dusty settlement carved into Montana's rugged landscape. A railroad stop, a saloon, a general store, and scattered businesses comprised the town that Delilah had called home for 3 miserable years. The town had once promised opportunity, now it represented only confinement. Delilah pushed through the door of Pearson's general store, the bell tinkling overhead. Mrs. Pearson glanced up from her needlework, her eyes widening at Delilah's disheveled appearance. "Goodness, Mrs. Valentine, you're soaked through. Come by the stove and warm yourself." "I can't stay long," Delilah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need supplies, just some basic provisions." Her fingers trembled as she placed a few coins on the countercoins she'd secretly saved over months of selling her embroidery work. Running an errand in this weather. "Jacob sent you out in this?" Mrs. Pearson asked, concern etching her plump face. Delilah averted her eyes. "He doesn't know I'm here." Mrs. Pearson's expression shifted with understanding. It wasn't the first time she'd seen a woman with concealed bruises in her store. Without another word, she began gathering items: dried beans, salt pork, flour, coffee, wrapping them in brown paper. The bell above the door jingled again, and Delilah froze at the sound of heavy boots on the wooden floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the determined stride without having to turn around. "There you are." Jacob Valentine's voice was deceptively calm, but Delilah could hear the undercurrent of rage. "I've been looking everywhere for you, wife, Mrs." Pearson's hands stilled over the packages and her eyes darted between husband and wife. "I'm just gathering some supplies, Jacob," Delilah said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "We were low on flour." "Funny," Jacob said, stepping closer, "since I checked the pantry before I left." "We have plenty." His eyes fell to the saddlebags at her feet, bulging with what few possessions she'd managed to grab before fleeing. "Planning a trip, are we?" "Jacob, please," Delilah whispered, backing away, his hand shot out, grasping her arm with bruising force. "You're coming home. Now." "Let go of me," Delilah said, trying to wrench free. "You're my wife," Jacob hissed, tightening his grip and beginning to drag her toward the door. "You go where I say you go." Mrs. Pearson opened her mouth to protest but closed it quickly when Jacob shot her a warning glare. The older woman's hands twisted her apron anxiously, but she remained silent, powerless against a man's authority over his wife. The door swung open again, and a tall figure stood silhouetted against the gray sky. Delilah felt a surge of recognition even before she could make out his features: the broad shoulders, the familiar stance, the way he filled the doorframe without trying. "Everything all right in here?" The newcomer's voice was deep, tinged with a southern drawl that had grown familiar to Sonora over the past 8 months. "Mind your business, Calloway," Jacob snapped. "Just taking my wife home." The man stepped fully into the light of the store, revealing the weather-worn face of Ross Calloway. His dark eyes assessed the situation in seconds. Delilah's frightened expression, Jacob's vise grip on her arm, the packed saddlebags by her feet. "Doesn't look to me like she wants to go," Ross said, his voice level but hard as iron. "What my wife wants doesn't concern you," Jacob replied, yanking Delilah toward the door. Delilah winced in pain, and something dangerous flashed in Ross's eyes. He moved with surprising speed for such a large man, placing himself between Jacob and the exit. "She ain't yours anymore," Ross said, his voice low and unmistakably final. Jacob released Delilah's arm in shock, his face contorting with rage. "She's my wife by law and by God. You've got no right. A man who beats his wife," Ross interrupted coldly, "forfeits any claim to her. Now step away." Jacob's hand twitched toward the pistol at his hip, but Ross was quicker. He hadn't drawn his weapon, but his posture made it clear he was ready to. The two men stared at each other, the air crackling with tension. "This isn't over," Jacob finally spat, backing toward the door. His eyes found Delilah's. "You'll come crawling back, you've nowhere to go." When the door slammed behind him, Delilah's legs nearly gave way. Ross turned to her, his expression softening. "You all right, Mrs. Valentine?" She nodded mutely, overwhelmed by what had just transpired. "He'll be back," Mrs. Pearson said nervously, "and likely with the sheriff." "Sheriff Wilkins drinks with Jacob every night," Delilah said, finding her voice. "He'll side with him." Ross nodded thoughtfully. "Then we need to get you somewhere safe until we sort this out." He picked up her saddlebags. "My ranch is outside town. Jacob won't dare come there." Delilah hesitated. She barely knew Ross Calloway beyond the polite nods they exchanged when she saw him in town. He'd arrived in Sonora last fall, purchased the old Miller property, and kept mostly to himself. People said he'd fought for the Confederacy, though he never spoke of it. He was known as fair, hardworking, and not one to tolerate foolishness. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Something haunted passed through his eyes. "Let's just say I've seen what men like Jacob Valentine can do. I won't stand by and watch it happen again." Mrs. Pearson finished packing the supplies and handed them to Delilah. "Go with Mr. Calloway, dear. Jacob will cool down eventually." But Delilah knew better. Jacob never cooled down, he only calculated his next move. "My horse is out back," Ross said. "We can take the trail behind the livery, less likely to be seen." Delilah nodded, gathering her courage. This was at the moment she'd been planning for months. Escape, freedom. She just hadn't expected to have help. Ross led her through the back door of the store. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but dark clouds still hung low. His horse, a powerful chestnut gelding, stood patiently waiting. Ross secured her bags, then offered his hand. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. Her father had taught her on their farm in Pennsylvania before the war, before everything changed. Ross helped her mount, then swung up behind her. The proximity made her tense, but his respectful distance behind her in the saddle reassured her. He clicked to the horse and they set off at a brisk pace, taking the back trail out of town. Delilah kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see Jacob in pursuit, but the trail remained empty. The further they rode from town, the lighter her chest felt, as though she could finally breathe properly for the first time in years. "It's about 4 miles to my place," Ross said, his voice close to her ear. "We'll be there before dark." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a bird. Eventually, the trail widened as they approached a valley nestled between rolling hills. A creek wound through the property and a sturdy log house stood in a clearing, smoke curling from the chimney. "Someone's there," Delilah said, tensing again. "That's just Franklin," Ross explained. "He helps around the ranch, former slave from Georgia. Older fellow, but the best cook in 3 counties and knows more about horses than most men forget in a lifetime." As they approached, an elderly black man emerged from the barn, squinting at them before breaking into a wide grin. "Mr. Ross, didn't expect you back so." Franklin's voice trailed off as he noticed Delilah. "Good afternoon, madam." Ross dismounted first, then helped Delilah down. "Franklin, this is Mrs. Valentine. She'll be staying with us for a while." Franklin's wise eyes took in her appearance, the small bags, and he nodded without asking questions. "I'll make up the spare room. Just put some stew on, should be enough for 3. "Thank you," Delilah said softly. "I'll show you inside," Ross said, carrying her bags. The cabin was simple but comfortable, a far cry from the ramshackle house she'd shared with Jacob in town. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with a wooden table and chairs nearby. A few books sat on a small shelf, and a rocking chair was positioned near the fire. Everything was clean and orderly if sparse. "It's not much," Ross said, seemingly embarrassed by the humble surroundings. "It's lovely," Delilah replied honestly. After years of living in a house filled with tension and fear, the simple peace of Ross's home felt luxurious. Franklin showed her to a small bedroom off the main living area. "It ain't fancy, but it's clean," he said, placing fresh linens on the bed. "Bathroom's out back. We heat water on the stove for washing." "Thank you, Franklin. This is more than I could have hoped for." When she was alone, Delilah sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to tremble. What had she done? Jacob would come looking for her. There would be consequences. But as she touched her bruised wrist, she knew she couldn't go back. Whatever came next, she would face it rather than return to that life. At dinner, they ate Franklin's venison stew in somewhat awkward silence until Franklin began telling stories of his adventures with Ross when they'd first come to Montana. Soon, Delilah found herself laughing for what felt like the first time in years. "So there's Mr. Ross, fancy cavalry boots stuck in the mud, hat gone downstream, and that ornery bull charging right at him," Franklin chuckled. "Never seen a man move so fast in my life." Ross shook his head, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "Franklin likes to embellish." "I do not," the older man replied indignantly. "Mrs. Valentine, that bull chased him clear across the creek and up a tree, sat there below him for 3 hours before I could scare it off." Delilah laughed, surprised by the warmth spreading through her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so at ease in company. After dinner, Ross excused himself to check on the horses and Franklin began clearing the dishes. "Let me help," Delilah insisted, gathering plates. "Mr. Ross wouldn't like me letting a guest work," Franklin protested. "I'm not a guest, I'm—" She paused, uncertain how to define herself. "I'm imposing on your kindness. The least I can do is help with the dishes." Franklin studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, I wash, you dry." As they worked side by side, Franklin spoke quietly. "Mr. Ross is a good man, been through more than his share of troubles but never lost his decency." "How long have you known him?" Delilah asked. "Since he was born," Franklin replied with a hint of pride. "Belonged to his father's household. After the war, when they freed us, most scattered. But Mr. Ross's daddy died at Gettysburg and his mama not long after from the consumption. Boy had nobody left. We sort of stuck together after that." "He fought for the Confederacy," Delilah said. Not quite a question. Franklin nodded. "He did." "Not for slavery. His family never owned but me and my wife and treated us fair as the times allowed. He fought because Virginia was home, but war changed him, made him see things different." He handed her a dripping plate. "Made him understand what it means to be property. To have no say in your own life." Delilah absorbed this, wiping the plate slowly. "My husband Jacob, he fought too, for the Union, came back different, angry. He wasn't always." She couldn't finish. Franklin's weathered hand briefly touched hers. "War breaks some men, Mrs. Valentine. Makes monsters of them. Others it wakes up, shows them what matters." He looked toward the door where Ross had exited. "Mr. Ross is the second kind." When Ross returned, they sat by the fire. Franklin excused himself early, leaving them alone. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. "I can't stay," Delilah finally said. "Jacob will come looking, and I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Ross stoked the fire before answering. "Where will you go?" "I have an aunt in Oregon. I've been saving to buy passage west." "That's a hard journey for a woman alone," Ross observed, not unkindly. "I don't have much choice," Delilah replied. Ross studied the flames. "Stay a few days, rest. Then I can escort you to Bozeman, larger town, easier to catch a stage heading west from there." "Why are you helping me?" she asked again. Ross didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low. "I had a sister, Amelia. She married a man who seemed decent enough at first, started slow, harsh words, controlling her comings and goings. Then came the bruises she tried to hide." His jaw tightened. "I was fighting in Virginia when she needed me most. By the time I returned home, she was gone. Died from a fall down the stairs, they said." "I'm so sorry," Delilah whispered. "Her husband still walks free," Ross continued, his eyes still on the fire. "Respected member of the community." No one questioned it. He finally looked at her. I promised myself I'd never stand by again if I saw another woman in danger, so that's why I'm helping you, Mrs. Valentine, because I couldn't help Amelia." Delilah felt tears threatening. "Please call me Delilah." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Delilah, then. That night, lying in a strange bed in a strange house, Delilah slept better than she had in years. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She quickly dressed in her spare dress, a simple blue cotton worn thin at the elbows, and stepped into the main room. Franklin was at the stove, whistling as he flipped flapjacks. "Good morning, Mrs. Valentine. Sleep well?" he asked cheerfully. "Better than expected, thank you." "Mr. Ross is out checking the fences, said to tell you to make yourself at home. Breakfast is almost ready." After eating, Delilah insisted on helping with the morning chores. Franklin directed her to the small kitchen garden behind the house, where she spent the morning weeding and harvesting early spring greens. The simple work soothed her, reminding her of her childhood on the farm. Ross returned mid-morning, his shirt damp with sweat from his labor. He stopped short when he saw her in the garden. "You don't need to work," he said, approaching. Delilah wiped her brow with the back of her hand. "I want to. It feels good to be useful." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We'll need to be careful." "I spotted riders on the North Ridge earlier. Could be nothing, but—" "Jacob," Delilah said, her stomach clenching with fear. "Possibly. Stay close to the house today." The warning cast a shadow over the peaceful morning. Delilah retreated indoors, helping Franklin with household tasks. By afternoon, the waiting had frayed her nerves to the breaking point. "I should leave," she told Ross when he came in for lunch. "I'm putting you both in danger." Ross shook his head. "Jacob Valentine is a coward. He might bluster in town with the law on his side, but out here, he'll think twice before making trouble." As evening approached, Franklin spotted a cloud of dust on the road leading to the ranch. Ross grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch, motioning for Delilah to stay inside. "It's the sheriff," Franklin reported, peering through the window, "and 3 others. Jacob's with them." Delilah's heart raced. "They've come for me." Ross's expression hardened. "You're not going anywhere you don't want to go." Sheriff Wilkins led the small party into the yard, Jacob riding closely behind him. 2 other men townsmen Delilah recognized as Jacob's drinking companions flanked them. All 4 were armed. "Calloway," the sheriff called. "Got a matter that needs resolving." Ross stepped off the porch, rifle held casually but ready. "Afternoon, Sheriff. What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Wilkins dismounted, hitching his thumbs in his belt near his pistol. "Got a report of a kidnapping. Jacob here says you took his wife against her will." "That's so." Ross replied, his voice dangerously calm. "Funny, since Mrs. Valentine came here of her own accord, seeking sanctuary from a man who beats her." Jacob's face contorted with rage. "That's a damned lie, Delilah," he shouted toward the house. "Get out here now." Inside, Delilah trembled. Franklin placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to go out there if you don't want to," the older man said quietly, but Delilah knew she did. This was her fight, and Ross had already risked too much on her behalf. Drawing a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Jacob's eyes narrowed at the sight of her. "Come here, wife. We're going home." Delilah gripped the porch railing to steady herself. "No, Jacob, I'm not coming back." "Now see here," Sheriff Wilkins intervened. "A wife's place is with her husband. That's the law." "The law also forbids assault," Ross countered, "which is what Jacob's been doing to her for years." The sheriff shrugged. "That's a private matter between a man and his wife." "Not anymore," Ross said firmly. Jacob dismounted, taking a step toward the house. "Delilah, don't make this more difficult than it has to be. These men have seen how you're embarrassing me. There'll be consequences when we get home." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and Delilah found her courage. "No, Jacob, I'm filing for divorce. I won't live in fear anymore." Jacob laughed harshly. "Divorce? On what grounds? No judge will grant it. Cruelty is grounds enough in this territory," Ross said, "and there are witnesses. Mrs. Pearson has seen the bruises. Doc Mitchell has treated her." "Hearsay," the sheriff dismissed. Now let's resolve this peacefully. Mrs. Valentine, come with your lawful husband or I'll have to arrest Calloway for interference in a family matter." Ross's rifle didn't waver. "You're welcome to try, Sheriff, but Mrs. Valentine stays if that's her choice." One of Jacob's friends spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "4 guns against 1, Calloway. Bad odds." "2," Franklin corrected, stepping onto the porch with a shotgun. "And I rarely miss at this range." The standoff stretched taut as wire. Delilah could hardly breathe watching the men measure each other, hands hovering near weapons. "There's been enough bloodshed over property rights," Ross said quietly, his words carrying in the still air. "And Mrs. Valentine is not property." "This isn't over," Jacob snarled, backing toward his horse. "I'll be back with more men." "You do that," Ross replied evenly. "But know this, if you set foot on my land again with ill intent, I won't be so hospitable." The sheriff hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to the law and his friendship with Jacob. Finally, he sighed. "Calloway, you're making a mistake. This kind of trouble follows a man. Some trouble's worth having, Sheriff." With a final venomous glare, Jacob mounted his horse. "You've made your choice, Delilah. Don't come crying back when he's done with you." The 4 men rode away, dust billowing behind them. Only when they disappeared from sight did Ross lower his rifle. "They'll be back," Franklin said grimly. Ross nodded. "With more men, likely." "Delilah, pack your things. We need to move you somewhere safer until this blows over." "Where?" she asked, still shaking from the confrontation. "I have a line cabin up in the foothills. Jacob won't know to look there." He turned to Franklin. "Can you manage things here for a few days?" The older man nodded. "Been managing since before you were born, boy. Go on now before they circle back." Within the hour, Ross and Delilah were riding into the gathering dusk, leaving the ranch behind. They followed game trails and creek beds, doubling back occasionally to ensure they weren't followed. Delilah clung to the saddle horn, exhausted and overwhelmed. "Not much further," Ross reassured her as they began to climb into the pine-covered foothills. The cabin appeared suddenly, a small, sturdy structure nestled among the trees, almost invisible until you were upon it. A small creek bubbled nearby and the view stretched back over the valley they'd climbed from. "It's not much," Ross said as he helped her dismount. "Just a place for shelter during roundup or when winter storms hit while I'm checking the high pastures." Inside was a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow cot, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and basic provisions stored in a corner. Ross quickly started a fire to chase away the evening chill. "You take the cot," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I've imposed enough," Delilah protested. "I can't take your bed." "It's not up for debate," Ross replied with a gentle firmness that reminded her he was used to giving orders. He began preparing a simple meal from the supplies they'd brought. "We'll stay here a few days, let things cool down in town, then we'll head to Bozeman as planned." As they ate beans and salt pork by firelight, Delilah studied the man across from her. In the flickering light, the hard edges of his face softened, revealing a handsomeness she hadn't fully appreciated before. His dark hair fell carelessly across his forehead, and the shadow of a beard had begun to appear along his jaw. "Tell me about your farm in Pennsylvania," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Surprised, Delilah found herself talking about the rolling hills of her childhood home, the apple orchard her father had planted, the creek where she'd learned to swim. Ross listened attentively, asking questions that drew out more memories, happy ones she'd almost forgotten after years with Jacob. "How did you end up with Valentine?" Ross asked eventually. Delilah's smile faded. "My father died in the war, Union Army, Battle of Antietam. My mother couldn't manage the farm alone and we lost it to taxes. We moved to Philadelphia to live with her sister, but there was barely enough for them, let alone us." She stared into the fire. "Jacob was boarding at my aunt's house. He had steady work at the shipyard, seemed kind enough. When he asked to court me, my mother was relieved." "You were young," Ross observed. 18, she confirmed. "Too young to see the warning signs. He was charming at first, attentive. But after the wedding, things changed. He lost his position at the shipyard drinking, fighting. When he heard about opportunities out west, he insisted we move. I thought maybe a fresh start would help, she laughed bitterly. It only got worse. No family nearby, no one to see what happened behind closed doors. Ross was silent for a long moment. My sister was 17 when she married. I should have protected her. You were at war, Delilah said softly. You couldn't have known. I should have, he insisted. When I came home and saw the bruises, I confronted him. He said she was clumsy, always falling. I believed him because it was easier than the truth. His hands clenched into fists. 2 weeks later, she was dead. Accident, they said, but I knew, and I did nothing. That's why you came west, to escape the memories, Ross nodded. Couldn't stand to see him in town, respected and pitied as the grieving widower. Sold what little I had, took Franklin with me and headed as far away as I could get. He poked at the fire. But some ghosts follow you. They fell into silence, each lost in their own painful memories. Eventually, Delilah yawned, the emotional and physical exhaustion of the day catching up with her. Get some rest, Ross said, rising to prepare the cot with a blanket. We're safe here for now. Despite her protests, Ross insisted on sleeping on the floor near the fire. Delilah lay awake for some time, listening to his steady breathing, wondering at the strange turn her life had taken. 2 days ago, she'd been trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. Now she was hidden in the mountains with a man she barely knew, yet somehow trusted completely. She woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. Ross was already up, stoking the fire and heating coffee. He looked up when she stirred. Morning, he said. Sleep all right. Better than I should have, given everything, she admitted, sitting up and smoothing her hair. They settled into an unexpected routine over the next few days. Ross would hunt or fish in the mornings, bringing back game for their meals. Delilah kept the cabin in order and gathered wild greens and berries to supplement their diet. In the afternoons, they'd sit outside, Ross whittling or repairing tack while Delilah mended clothing. They talked easily, sharing stories of their lives before the war changed everything. On the third day, as they sat watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold, Ross cleared his throat awkwardly. I've been thinking about your situation, he said. The journey to Oregon will be dangerous for a woman alone, Delilah nodded. It was a concern that had kept her awake at night. I have a proposition, Ross continued, his eyes fixed on the horizon. A business arrangement of sorts. What kind of arrangement? Delilah asked cautiously. Marriage, he said simply. Delilah stared at him, certain she'd misheard. I beg your pardon. Ross finally looked at her, his expression serious. Hear me out. As a married woman trying to divorce her husband, you have few rights, but as a widow remarried, you'd be beyond Jacob's reach legally. But I'm not a widow, Delilah pointed out. No one in Bozeman would know that. We could present ourselves as newly married, start fresh where Jacob can't reach you. Delilah's mind raced. You'd perjure yourself for a woman you barely know. A slight smile touched his lips. I know enough, Delilah Valentine. I know you're brave, resourceful, and deserving of a life without fear. His expression grew more serious. To be clear, this would be a marriage of convenience only. You'd have your own room, your own privacy. I'd expect nothing from you except perhaps help around the ranch. In return, you'd have protection, a home, and freedom to build whatever life you wish. And if I still wanted to go to Oregon eventually, she asked, then I'd wish you well and provide what help I could, he promised. This isn't about trapping you in another cage, Delilah. It's about giving you choices. She studied him, this man who'd risked everything for her with no expectation of return. Why would you do this? Ross looked away. Maybe I'm tired of being alone. Maybe I want to make amends for failing Amelia, or maybe... He hesitated. Maybe I just think you deserve better than what life's handed you so far. I need time to think, she said quietly. He nodded. Of course, it's not a decision to make lightly. That night, Delilah lay awake long after Ross's breathing had deepened into sleep. His proposal circled in her mind. Marriage again, the very institution that had imprisoned her. And yet, with Ross, it promised freedom instead of confinement, protection instead of peril. She studied his sleeping form by the dying firelight. Ross Calloway was nothing like Jacob Valentine. Where Jacob was impulsive and cruel, Ross was thoughtful and kind. Where Jacob demanded, Ross offered. The differences were as vast as the Montana sky, but could she trust again? Could she bind herself to another man, even one as honorable as Ross seemed to be? And what about the feelings stirring within her, feelings she'd thought long dead after years with Jacob? Was it merely gratitude or something deeper? By morning, she had her answer. "I accept your proposal," she told Ross as they shared breakfast, "but I have conditions of my own." His eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm listening." "First, this is a partnership, not ownership. I won't be ordered or controlled." Ross nodded. "Agreed." "Second, I contribute equally. I'll work the ranch, keep the books, whatever needs doing. I won't be a charity case." "Fair enough," Ross said. "And third," she hesitated, "if either of us should ever wish to dissolve this arrangement, we do so amicably with no recriminations." Ross considered her conditions thoughtfully. "I can agree to all that, but I have one condition of my own." Delilah tensed. "Which is?" "That you promise to tell me if you ever feel unsafe or unhappy. I won't have another woman suffering in silence under my roof." Relief washed over her. "I promise." They rode into Bozeman 2 days later, having taken a circuitous route to avoid being followed. The bustling town was a far cry from sleepy Sonora streets lined with businesses, a proper hotel, even a theater. They went first to the county clerk's office, where Ross filed homestead papers adding Delilah's name to his property deed. "Just married," he explained to the clerk with a smile that transformed his normally serious face. "Making it official." The clerk offered perfunctory congratulations, more interested in his paperwork than their story. From there, they visited a dressmaker, where Ross insisted on purchasing Delilah 2 new dresses and practical work clothes. "You can't work a ranch in town dresses," he said when she protested the expense. They took rooms at the hotel separate but adjoining and ate dinner in the hotel restaurant. It was the first proper meal Delilah had eaten in a restaurant in years, and she savored every bite. "Tomorrow we'll head back," Ross said as they finished their meal. "Franklin will be worried." Delilah nodded, suddenly nervous about returning to the ranch not as a fugitive guest but as Ross's wife, however unconventional their arrangement. "What will we tell Franklin?" she asked as they walked back to their rooms. "The truth," Ross replied simply. "Franklin's family. No secrets between us." In her room that night, Delilah gazed out the window at the busy street below. For the first time in years, she felt a fragile hope taking root. Not just escape from Jacob, but the possibility of a new life, a good life with a man who treated her as an equal. They returned to the ranch to find Franklin had been busy in their absence. The house was spotless. A new quilt adorned Delilah's bed, and a special dinner waited on the stove. "Figured you two might have news," the older man said with a knowing smile when Ross explained their arrangement. "It's not a real marriage, Franklin," Delilah felt compelled to clarify. Franklin just chuckled. "Whatever you say, Mrs. Calloway." The name startled her. Mrs. Calloway. She hadn't even considered that she'd take Ross's name as part of their ruse, yet somehow it felt right in a way that Mrs. Valentine never had. Life settled into a rhythm on the ranch. Spring blossomed into summer, bringing long days of work and warm evenings on the porch. True to his word, Ross treated Delilah as a partner. He taught her about ranching, how to mend fences, tend cattle, predict weather from the way the wind shifted. In return, she transformed the neglected house into a home, planted a larger garden, and kept meticulous records of the ranch's finances. They worked well together, their strengths complementing each other naturally. Ross respected her opinions, sought her advice, and never raised his voice or hand to her. Some evenings they'd sit by the fire, Ross reading aloud from one of his books while Delilah sewed or sketched. Other times they'd simply talk, sharing thoughts and memories as the night deepened around them. Franklin watched their growing friendship with knowing eyes, but kept his observations to himself. He merely smiled when he caught them laughing together or standing a bit closer than strictly necessary. News from Sonora reached them occasionally. Jacob had indeed gathered a larger party to return to the ranch, only to find Ross and Delilah gone. He'd raged and threatened, but without a clear target, his anger eventually subsided into sullen resentment. He still vowed to reclaim his wife, but for now he remained in Sonora, drinking away his days at the saloon. As summer reached its peak, Ross began preparations for the fall cattle drive. The ranch's survival depended on getting their cattle to market before winter set in. "I'll be gone for nearly 3 weeks," he told Delilah one evening as they sat on the porch. "Franklin will stay with you, but I worry about leaving you vulnerable." "We'll be fine," Delilah assured him, though the thought of his absence created a hollow feeling in her chest. Ross studied her face in the fading light. "You've changed," he observed. "Have I?" He nodded. "You're stronger, more sure of yourself." "I've always been strong," she replied. "I just forgot it for a while." "That you have," he agreed with a smile that made something flutter inside her. The night before Ross was to leave with the cattle drive, a summer thunderstorm rolled across the valley. Lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the cabin's walls. Unable to sleep, Delilah wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped onto the porch to watch nature's display. She found Ross already there, leaning against a post, his face illuminated by each lightning flash. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, joining him. "Never could during storms," he admitted. "My father used to say thunder was just the angels moving furniture in heaven." Delilah smiled at the image. "My mother said it was God bowling." They watched the lightning dance across the distant mountains, the silence between them comfortable. When Ross spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "These past months with you have been unexpected." Delilah glanced at him. "Unexpected good or unexpected bad?" "Good," he said firmly. "Better than I'd thought possible." A particularly bright lightning flash illuminated his face, and Delilah was struck by the vulnerability in his expression. This strong, capable man who faced down armed adversaries without flinching looked almost boyish in his uncertainty. "I've been thinking," Ross continued, "about our arrangement." Delilah's heart quickened. Was he tired of their charade? Did he regret his offer? "I know we agreed this was a marriage in name only," he said slowly, "and I've respected those terms, but I find myself—" He hesitated, searching for words. "I find myself wishing it could be more." The thunder seemed to echo her heartbeat as she processed his words. More. Ross turned to face her fully. "I'm falling in love with you, Delilah. I've tried not to. God knows you deserve time and space to heal, but there it is. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you hum when you think no one's listening. I love who I am when I'm with you." Delilah stood frozen, overwhelmed by his confession. Emotions she'd kept carefully contained burst free: fear, hope, longing. "You don't need to say anything," Ross continued quickly. "I don't expect anything to change. I just couldn't leave tomorrow without you knowing the truth." "Ross," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. He waited, patient as always. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Of me?" The pain in his voice was palpable. "No," she said, taking a step closer. "Never of you. I'm afraid of what I feel, afraid to trust it." "Afraid it will disappear like morning mist." Ross's expression softened. "Some things endure, Delilah. Not all men are Jacob Valentine." "I know that now." She reached out tentatively, touching his hand. "I've been fighting my feelings too, telling myself it's just gratitude or confusion." "But it's more than that." Hope flickered in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I think I'm falling in love with you too," Delilah whispered, "and it terrifies me." Ross took her hand fully in his touch gentle. "We can go as slowly as you need. I'm not going anywhere." Lightning flashed again, and in its brief illumination, Delilah saw everything she needed to know in Ross's eyes. This wasn't the possessive desire she'd seen in Jacob's gaze. This was something deeper, something that saw her, truly saw her, and cherished what it found. She leaned forward, her free hand coming to rest on his chest. Beneath her palm, his heart raced as quickly as her own. Ross remained perfectly still, letting her set the pace. When their lips met, it was tentative at first, a question, not a demand. But as Ross's arms encircled her, careful and reverent, the kiss deepened into an answer. The storm raged around them, but for that moment, they existed in perfect stillness at its center. When they finally parted, Ross pressed his forehead to hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first night you helped Franklin with the dishes," he confessed. Delilah laughed softly. "That longer probably, I just didn't recognize it then." They stood embracing on the porch until the storm began to abate, speaking softly of feelings long contained and now cautiously released. When they finally returned inside, Ross walked her to her door. "Nothing needs to change," he assured her. "Not until you're ready." Delilah touched his face, marveling at the right to do so. "Some things have already changed," she said, "and for the better." In the morning, Ross departed with the cattle drive, the memory of their kiss sustaining them both through the separation. Delilah threw herself into ranch work, helping Franklin with tasks usually reserved for Ross. The physical labor kept her mind occupied during the day, but evenings were lonely without Ross's quiet presence. A week into Ross's absence, Franklin returned from a supply run to Bozeman with troubling news. "Jacob Valentine's been asking questions in town," the older man reported grimly. "Showing your picture around, claiming his wife ran off." Delilah's stomach clenched with fear. "How did he know to look in Bozeman? Small towns talk," Franklin said with a shrug. "Someone must have mentioned seeing Ross there with a woman." That night, Delilah double-checked all the doors and windows, her old fears resurfacing. Jacob wouldn't give up easily. His pride wouldn't allow it. 3 days later, her fears were realized when the sound of approaching horses woke her before dawn. Franklin was already up, shotgun in hand. "Stay inside," he told her. "I'll handle this." But Delilah grabbed her own rifle, one Ross had taught her to use for protection. "We'll handle it together." They stepped onto the porch as 4 riders entered the yard. Jacob led them, his face twisted with a familiar rage that made Delilah's blood run cold. Sheriff Wilkins wasn't with them this time, just 3 rough-looking men Delilah didn't recognize. "Where is she?" Jacob demanded, dismounting. "Where's my wife?" Franklin leveled his shotgun. "No one by that name here, just Mrs. Calloway and myself." Jacob's eyes bulged. "Mrs. Calloway, you married that Confederate bastard," he spat on the ground. "That's bigamy, Delilah, a crime." "The only criminal here is you," Delilah replied, her rifle steady despite her trembling hands. "Leave our property now." One of Jacob's companions laughed. "Feisty little thing, ain't she? See why you want her back, Valentine." Jacob took a step forward. "You're coming home, Delilah." "One way or another." "She is home," Franklin said firmly. "Stay out of this, old man," Jacob snarled. "This doesn't concern you." "Everything on this ranch concerns me," Franklin replied, "including Mrs. Calloway's welfare." Jacob's hand moved to his pistol. "I won't ask again." "Either she comes willingly or things get unpleasant." Delilah's finger tightened on the trigger. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Jacob." "You should be," he growled, drawing his weapon. The shot rang out before Delilah could react, not from Jacob's gun, but from somewhere behind the house. Jacob howled in pain, dropping his pistol as blood bloomed on his shoulder. "Next one goes through your heart," Ross's voice called from the shadows of the barn. He stepped into view, rifle raised, eyes cold as winter. "I warned you about coming back here." Jacob clutched his wounded shoulder, face pale with shock and pain. "You shot me, you bastard, you shot me." "Be grateful I didn't aim lower," Ross replied evenly. He moved to stand beside Delilah and Franklin on the porch. "Now take your friends and get off my land." The 3 men with Jacob looked uncertain, clearly not having bargained for actual gunplay. One of them dismounted to help Jacob back onto his horse. "This isn't over, Calloway," Jacob hissed through clenched teeth. "The law's on my side." "Is it?" Ross countered. "Trespassing, attempted abduction, drawing a weapon with intent, those are hanging offenses in this territory." Care to test which side the law favors? Jacob glowered but had no response. As his companions helped him onto his horse, he fixed Delilah with a venomous glare. "You'll regret this, Delilah, I promise you that." When they'd ridden away, Delilah's knees nearly buckled with relief. Ross caught her arm, steadying her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injury. She nodded, words temporarily beyond her. Ross turned to Franklin. "You okay, old friend?" Franklin lowered his shotgun with a shaky laugh. "Heart's racing something fierce, but I'm standing. What are you doing back so early? Drive's not due back for another week." "Got the cattle to market faster than expected," Ross explained. "Good thing, too." He looked back at Delilah, his expression softening. "I had a feeling I needed to get back." Later, after Franklin had gone to bed and they were alone by the fire, Delilah finally found her voice again. "You shot him," she said softly. "I did," Ross acknowledged. "I aimed to wound, not kill. Though he deserved worse. He'll go to the sheriff." "Let him," Ross said with a shrug. "He was trespassing, armed, and threatening my wife. No court would convict me." Delilah studied his calm face. "You're not worried about Jacob?" "No, about you." He took her hand. "Yes. This ordeal won't truly end until he accepts you're never coming back. Or until he finds someone else to torment," Delilah said bitterly. Ross squeezed her hand. "We'll be vigilant, but we can't live in fear of him forever." Delilah leaned against his shoulder, drawing strength from his presence. "When I saw him today, I was terrified, but I stood my ground. I wouldn't have done that 6 months ago." "That wasn't me," Ross said. "That strength was always in you, you just found it again." She looked up at him, this man who saw her courage when she'd forgotten it existed. "I love you," she said simply. "Not out of gratitude or necessity, but because of who you are, who we are together." Ross's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I love you too. More than I thought possible." "I think," Delilah said carefully, "I'm ready for this marriage to be real in every way." Ross studied her face. "Are you certain we have time, all the time you need?" "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied. That night, their marriage truly began not as a legal fiction or a protective measure, but as a union of equals, built on respect, admiration, and deepening love. As autumn painted the valley in russet and gold, news reached them that Jacob Valentine had left Sonora. According to Mrs. Pearson's letter, he'd headed for California after selling what little he owned. Whether fleeing creditors or simply accepting defeat, his departure lifted the last shadow from Delilah's new life. Winter brought heavy snows that transformed the ranch into a private world. The long evenings were filled with conversation, laughter, and plans for the future. Ross and Delilah's relationship deepened with each passing day, their initial caution giving way to the comfortable intimacy of two people who had found their perfect match. Franklin watched their happiness with quiet satisfaction, occasionally teasing them about how their business arrangement had turned out. "Never seen a business with so much kissing," he'd remark, making Delilah blush and Ross chuckle. Spring arrived with renewal. The ranch flourished under their combined care, Ross's practical knowledge, Delilah's organizational skills, and Franklin's lifetime of experience creating a prosperous enterprise. They hired 2 young cowhands to help with the expanding herd, built a larger barn, and added a proper kitchen garden that became Delilah's pride. In late spring, as wildflowers carpeted the valley, Delilah shared news that brought tears to Ross's eyes. "A baby," he whispered, his hand gently touching her still flat stomach. "Are you certain?" "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday when I was in town," she said, her own eyes shining. "Due in winter." Ross gathered her in his arms, his joy too great for words. Later that night, he confessed his fears that he wouldn't know how to be a good father, having lost his own so young. "You'll be wonderful," Delilah assured him. "You have so much love to give." The months passed in a glow of anticipation. Ross became even more protective, insisting Delilah rest more and delegate heavier tasks. She humored him to a point, but refused to be treated as fragile. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. many while working fields or tending herds. I'm perfectly capable of gathering eggs. Their son arrived during the first snowfall of December, a healthy, lusty-lunged boy they named Samuel Franklin Calloway, honoring both Ross's father and the man who had become family to them both. Franklin wept unashamedly when they placed the baby in his arms. "Never thought I'd live to see such a day," the old man said, his weathered finger gently tracing the infant's cheek. "A Calloway child born free on Calloway land." As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch grew as well. They added a proper second story to the house, giving them more bedrooms for their expanding family. Ross's careful management and Delilah's sharp business sense turned their modest operation into one of the most successful in the county. By Samuel's third birthday, he had a sister, little Amelia Rose, named for the aunt she would never know but whose memory lived on in her father's determination to create a home where women were cherished, not controlled. Franklin, now moving more slowly but still sharp as ever, became the children's beloved Grandpa Frank, filling their days with stories and small adventures. The old man had found a peace in his later years that had eluded him for much of his life, surrounded by a family that loved him not as a servant but as its heart. 5 years after Delilah had first stepped into Pearson's general store with desperate plans for escape, she stood on the porch of her home, watching Ross teach Samuel to ride his first pony while Amelia toddled after them, demanding her turn. Franklin sat nearby in his favorite rocker, whittling a toy horse for the children. The woman who had once lived in constant fear now stood tall, confident in her place in the world and in the love that surrounded her. The bruises on her body and soul had long since healed, replaced by the marks of a life well-lived, laugh lines around her eyes, calluses on hands that worked willingly, a heart that had learned to trust again. As Ross looked up from the corral and caught her watching, his smile still made her heart skip after all these years. He handed Samuel's pony to one of the ranch hands and made his way to the porch, scooping up Amelia as he came. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" he asked, settling beside her with their daughter in his lap. Delilah leaned against him, savoring the solid warmth of him. "I was thinking about that day in Pearson's store, when Jacob tried to drag me home." Ross's arm tightened around her. "The day I said you weren't his anymore." She smiled at the memory. "You didn't even know me then." "I knew enough," Ross replied, echoing words he'd spoken years before. "I knew a good woman when I saw one." Franklin chuckled from his rocker. What he knew was a pretty face when he saw one. The good woman part was just luck. Ross laughed, tossing a playful glare at the old man. "Don't listen to him. I'm wiser than he gives me credit for." "You are now," Franklin agreed with a wink at Delilah, "thanks to this one setting you straight." As the sun began to set over the valley that had become her home, Delilah surveyed the life she had built from the ashes of her past. A husband who partnered rather than dominated. Children who would grow up knowing only love and respect. Land that yielded to careful stewardship. A future limited only by their imagination. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed softly to Ross. He kissed her temple, his voice warm against her skin. "You deserve every bit of it, and more." That night, as moonlight silvered the bedroom they had shared for 5 years, Ross traced the curve of Delilah's cheek with gentle fingers. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Taking a chance on a stranger that day, Delilah caught his hand, pressing a kiss to his palm. "Never. Not for a single moment. Even when I'm being stubborn," he teased. "Especially then," she replied with a laugh. "Your stubbornness saved my life, Ross Calloway." He grew serious, gathering her close. "No, Delilah, you saved your own life when you packed those bags and walked out Jacob's door. I just had the good fortune to be there when you did." As they drifted towards sleep in each other's arms, Delilah reflected on the long journey from prisoner to partner, from victim to victor. The road had been difficult, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but it had led her here to this man, this family, this life of purpose and joy. She had once believed herself broken beyond repair, but now she understood that strength often emerges from the most profound wounds. Like the land around them, which bloomed most vibrantly after the harshest winters, she had not merely survived but flourished. And when Ross murmured, "I love you," against her hair as he did every night, Delilah responded with the certainty of a woman who had found not just safety, but her truest self in the shelter of that love. "I love you too," she whispered. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." Outside, the Montana wind sang through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate wild and free, like the hearts that had found their home in this valley, in this house, in each other.